Okay, in this video we're going to look at some of the concepts related to arrays, loading arrays, and using for loops to traverse arrays. These are all concepts that will be on our next quiz, so let's take a quick look. Over here in the runner class I've got a public static void main, and I am creating a quiz concepts object I just called a QC, and from this object I can call all the methods in my quiz concepts class. I don't have anything yet in my quiz concepts class, but let's go ahead and do let's create an array. The first thing I'm going to do is to create the signature for the load array method. And so inside of the class I've got my constructor, and now I've got this guy. If I close this with a parentheses, notice I have the methods are blocked in yellow in BlueJ, and this guy has the critical parts that I want you to pay attention to are it's taking in an int which represents the length of the array I'm going to create in this method. The method is called load array, and it's going to return an array of ints, and again this is public because I'm going to be calling this from another class. And so let's go ahead and put in, so my declaration looks like this. I have int, square brackets, the array is called nums, and notice it says new int array, and its length is whatever number I pass in. So when I create a quiz concepts object and I call the method load array, I can send it in an integer value, and I'm going to create an array of exactly that length. Next I'm going to create a for loop, and the for loop is going to go from 0. Remember that the index of the array always starts at 0, and the length is going to be one more than the last index. So the last index, for instance, if I send in a 10, the length of this guy is 10, but the last index will be 9. 0 to 9 gives me 10 elements. And so let's go ahead and close this guy, and I'm ready to load the array. This is going to traverse the array. This is going to go through every element in my array, and it's going to do whatever I want it to do. In this case, I'm going to load it with a random number. So in this case, I want the random number to be generated inside the for loop. So every time I come back into the for loop, I'm going to create a new random number, and the random number I'm going to create is going to be an int, and this, remember, is going to give me a double between 0 and 9, and I'm going to cast that as an int, and then I add 1, so that will give me an int between 1 and 10. Finally, in the for loop, I'm going to load this into my array, and so to do that, I just say nums I. So the first time I come in this loop, I is equal to 0, so the first element, nums 0, gets loaded with whatever random number I just created. Then I come back up here, I increment I, so now I is equal to 1. 1 is still less than the length. Let's say I passed in a 10, so 1 is less than 10. And now I create another random number, and I'm going to load that into I. Now I is 1, so that gets loaded into the next element of the array, and so on until I'm done. And then when I'm finished with this, I'm just simply going to return nums. Now I'm not using the square brackets here because what nums is, it is the array, and so because I've declared this as an array of ints here, when I say I'm going to return an array of ints, the array of ints I'm going to return is nums. Let's go ahead and hit Control-Shift-I to auto-format that, and this is good to go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just take a little peek at what we just did. We created a quiz runner. So quiz runner is just going to have the main method, and so quiz runner is going to create a quiz concepts object. So I have these two classes, quiz runner and quiz objects, or quiz concepts rather. And so over here, this is where I have my main method, and I create my quiz concept object, and I'm going to call my methods in here. So over here I've got a constructor, and then I've got my method over here. This method was called load array, and I'm going to pass it in the number. Let's say I pass in the number 10, then this guy's going to receive the number 10, and it's going to create an array of length 10. The way that I do that is in the method signature, I made it public, first of all because this guy has to be seen from another class. So I created this quiz. I see in BlueJ I'm going to have the little arrow, and I'm going to have a return type, and then I have the quiz name load array, and then I'm going to pass, or I'm going to receive this parameter, and it's going to be an int, which represents the length, and I just called it len, and I have my curly bracket. At this point, I created the integer array, so that's where I say int array, and I give it the name nums. And so this is actually going to create this guy, whatever length I tell it, so I'll say new int array, and that gave me length. And so what this is going to do, it's going to create an array. Let's say I'm passing in the number 10, so I'm receiving the number 10 in here. Notice that when I do this, I don't give the type here, but I do have to give the type here. So when I'm sending, I can send in either a variable or a number, like 10, but I don't have to say what type it is. But when I receive it in Java, I do have to say the type. So this is going to take a parameter. It's going to take one int. I've called it length, and I can use that guy right here. So when I create my array, this guy gets built. It's called nums. Remember, nums is actually an address reference that points to this thing, and the indexes are going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way through 9 will be the last index. So it has a length of 10. Okay, so now that I've created my array, I'll come back in here. Notice that I have called, I've got my quiz concepts object, I'm calling the method load array, I'm sending it the number 10. It's going to create that array of 10 elements. It's going to load each element with a random number between 1 and 10, and it's going to return the array. So this array is going to be pointing to that same array, numbers. So I've got an int array called numbers. At this point, I want to make a second method, and I want this guy to be called print array. Notice that I use my quiz concepts object dot print array. That's how I get to the method, and I'm sending it this array of integers. So if I go back and I look at my quiz concepts, I'm going to go ahead and create another method right in here. Okay, so I will just put in public void print array. Notice I'm receiving an array of ints, and that guy is good to go. So I need to now tell it what to do. I think what I'll do here is, notice that I'm saying I'm not going to return anything. This guy is simply going to take in whatever array I created. Notice that I can't access nums directly, because nums is declared and initialized in between these two curly braces. It can only be seen here. But since I'm returning it back to the main method, from the main method I'm sending it in here, and at this point I can go ahead and do whatever I want. So I'm just going to print this to the screen. And so I need a print statement. I'll say system.out.print. And what I want to do at this point is use the new line, or I can use the tab character. This is a sequence. So I'm going to tab, and I'm going to print this guy out. So this is only going to print out one element, and it doesn't even know what I is at this point. So if I say, for instance, print out element 0, it will only give me that one value. What I need to do, again, is traverse the array. And so we'll definitely see this on the quiz. So I just borrowed this line of code from below, and there's a little problem with it, but we'll go ahead and fix that. The problem is that we don't know what nums is, because nums can only be seen down here. But we're now calling this guy n, and I did that intentionally so we can see that this guy gets returned as nums back to the main method. In the main, it's called numbers, it's passed in as numbers, but it's received here as n. And so the point is, anytime I call this print array, I just have to send in an array of ints. Whatever I call it here, that's what I want to use in here. And I'm just going to go ahead from, again, if it has length 10, I'm going to go from 0 to 9. 9 plus 0 is 10. In any case, this should work pretty well. Let's go ahead and see if this is good to go. So if I were to save this, and if I were to compile these, let's see if I've made any errors. Oh, it looks pretty good. So I'll go ahead and hit main, and let's see what happens. So I get 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. Not what I was expecting, and I don't know what the curly braces were, so let's stop and take a look. Okay, so here's the problem. In my example, I said, look what would happen if we put a 0 in here. And so it turns out in the first element, we're just showing that same element 10 times. What I want to do is I want to take this value, I, and put it in here. So every time I come through the loop, I is going to change. The first time it's going to be 0, then I increment it. If it's less than the length, then I'm going to come back here. I is going to be 1 now. So I'm going to print the next element. Then I increment it. I becomes 2. If it's less than length, I come back in. And so at this point, I will keep showing these. So let's go ahead and see if that's working. So let's go ahead and compile this. No syntax errors. Let's run it one more time now and see what happens. Main, and let's go. Okay, so I got 8, 2, 8, 6, 8, 8, 1, 7, 7. So that looks pretty reasonable. The problem is it looks like it's running off the end of the screen. And so let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to put a simple if statement in here, and I'm going to say, every time I come in here, before I print it, I'm going to say if I've got some number of characters, I can go ahead and do a new line character. So I'm going to do system out.print, and I'll do a new line character if some condition is met. So let's go ahead and just say new line inside the double quotes. And the condition is, let's say I only want 3. Let's make it 5. Let's say I want 5 numbers. So if I is evenly divisible by 5, so I mod 5, if that is equal to 0, that means it's divisible by 5, then I'm going to go ahead and hit the new line, or I'm going to print a new line character, and so that will change my formatting a bit. Let's go ahead and run this one more time and see what happens. Compile that guy and run this, and we'll go. Now I'm getting NI all up here. I'm not sure why. Let's go ahead and see what's going on with that. Okay, so that was just silliness on my part. I just forgot to clear the console, so it wasn't printing all that stuff out. Let's go ahead and try it again. If I run it and I get this, I get 10 numbers, 2 rows of 5 columns, and notice it's got this nice 4, 10, 4, and so forth. If I want to change this so that I have a different size, I can just come in here, and instead of sending in 10, let's go ahead and send in 50. Go ahead and run this again, and at this point I'm going to see that this guy will give me 50 random numbers. Okay, so they're all right there. So they're all between 1 and 10. We don't see any zeros. We don't see any 11s. We all see that these are, every time I get to the 5th one, since this guy is divisible by 0, hit a new line character, start back down here, and the tab is going to give me nice even columns. And so that's what this looks like. Okay, I want to point out one other thing, and this is kind of an important point in Java. When I'm passing an object, remember an array is an object, I declared it as nums. And I used the keyword new when I did that, and so nums itself was just a reference pointing to this thing that was created in memory. The first time I did it, I created at length 10, so it had first index was 0, the last index was 9. And what happens is num is just holding the address of where this is located. And then I returned nums, which is just this address, and so now back in the main method I got this guy called numbers, and what it got was the address. So now it's pointing to the same array. When I sent numbers to the print array method, it got received as n, and n got that same address, and so now it's pointing to that same array. And so that's why in the 3 different parts of the program, when I'm actually just passing around this reference value, it's pointing to that same object that is in memory.